At the age of 16, my adoptive parents kicked me out and disowned me because I became pregnant and refused to give them my kid. 25 years later, their biological daughter discovered me on Instagram and contacted out. When I was 3 years old, my parents died in a horrible plane crash. I don't recall much about the crash, other than the fact that I was in the aisle seat one moment and in the hospital the next. As a child, it was terrifying to wake up to nurses and physicians strolling around. I recall a social worker sitting by my bedside, saying that my parents had died and that I would need to go live with another family for a while. It was also complicated and daunting. Following that, I went through a number of adjustments. I remained with a variety of foster families, none of which seemed like home. Then, at the age of 6, I was introduced to Janet and Richard, who had been wishing for their own child. I could tell they were friendly and caring from the time I met them. They accepted me as their own without hesitation, filling the emptiness in my heart that had been craving for love and acceptance. After all of the misery I had been through, I felt I had finally found my own second family. From the moment I was adopted and forced to move in with them, I noticed Richard was quite harsh and regimented, and Janet always seemed to defer to him. It wasn't until much later that I discovered the explanation behind Richard's demeanor. He was a Navy veteran who had been injured in battle several years earlier. His military background explains why he insisted on meticulous planning and execution, down to the last detail. Despite recognizing the underlying cause of his behavior, it didn't make it any easier when he would become enraged and raise his voice, especially over seemingly little issues like being a minute late for school on weekdays. His strictness made me nervous at times, and I had to walk on eggshells to escape his wrath. Janet, on the other hand, was more calm, and she enjoyed smoking when Richard was not present. I've seen her finish an entire pack of cigarettes all by herself. She often appeared forlorn and lost in her thoughts. She seldom inquired about my school or homework. The only thing she did all day except smoking was cook food and tidy the house, because Richard was quite rigid about it. We all got along well at first, and I didn't notice many arguments. However, as I grew older, I began to realize that Richard was abusive. Richard valued my grades beyond all else. He would continuously tell me that if someone scored more than me, I needed to elevate my game. He would also get angry and slap me if I received even 1 point less in my examinations, calling me stupid. He would threaten to drive me back to the foster home if I did not do well. As a child, I had no idea that this was impossible. Therefore, it terrified me every time Dad mentioned it. I would strive so hard to please him in order to assure that he would not give me back. I'd also noticed that Janet and Richard would argue, and Richard would bring her into their bedroom. She would be bruised all over her arms and face. At first, I didn't understand why, but then I realized he was physically abusing her. He didn't want me to see him beat her up in case I revealed the truth in front of others, so he dragged Janet into the bedroom. I just couldn't understand why Janet never contacted the cops on him. After their quarrel, all she did was sit and cry silently for hours while Richard smoked cigars and watched television. After realizing he was aggressive, I was frightened to be alone with Richard or do anything that would irritate him. But, as anyone who has been up in an abusive household knows, abusers will use any reason to vent their rage on you. No matter how careful I was, or how hard I tried not to upset him, he always found an excuse to lash out. In the beginning, it was always my grades, but as I grew older, his focus changed. Suddenly, it wasn't only about my academic success. It was about petty things like the clothes I wore, the friends I hung out with, and whether or not any guy liked me. He would continuously warn me that I needed to come home straight from school since hanging out with friends would only distract me. He said that my buddies would be meaningless if I didn't study hard. Unbeknownst to Richard, Janet gently permitted me to spend an hour with my pals after school. She recognized that Richard wouldn't be home until later in the evening, so she saw it as a little chance for me to have some sort of normalcy and social engagement outside of our stressful home situation. It was a small relief from the constant pressure and scrutiny I faced at home, and I treasured those moments with my friends, no matter how fleeting they were. Janet's small act of compassion meant a lot to me. However, things deteriorated rapidly when Richard lost his job. The loss of his employment appeared to aggravate his dissatisfaction and fury, aggravating the abusive environment in our home. With the extra burden of financial insecurity, Richard became even more unpredictable and temperamental, lashing out at the least provocation. One night, Janet had just finished preparing dinner, and as Richard sat down at the table, he launched into a diatribe about how it didn't meet his expectations. He began ranting and banging the table, telling her that she was not good enough and that if she couldn't cook correctly, he would not hesitate to throw her out on the streets. He tossed his plate against the wall, and Janet and I sat scared, simply watching him. I could feel my entire body shaking. Later, when I ate the dinner, I saw nothing wrong with Janet's cooking. Richard's drinking worsened with time as he was unemployed and had nothing to do but lay around all day. I'd wake up in the morning to find wine bottles all over the living room, which Janet had to clean up. I also couldn't hang out with any of my friends at this period, since Richard would ask if I was even a minute late getting home from school. When I turned 14, one of my classmates, Alex, professed his feelings for me and invited me out on a date. I was worried about Richard finding out, but as a teenager, I wanted to know what it was like to go on a date and express my emotions. So, despite my reservations, I agreed to go out with Alex. We met at a local park after school and spent the afternoon talking and getting to know each other better. Going on that date was the best decision I've ever made, since it's how Alex and I fell in love. He was everything Richard wasn't. He was compassionate and nice to everyone, including animals. He would bring me my favourite treats whenever he could, after saving his allowance. I didn't have a decent role model, so I never anticipated much from Alex. However, he treated me well. Richard was always suspicious and would inquire if I was hanging out with any men. I would decline, quietly hope that he would not discover the truth. Fortunately, I wasn't allowed to have a phone, so there were no damning texts for him to read and discover. Alex and I were always cautious about our dates, and we didn't even tell our friends we were dating so that the word wouldn't spread. Alex knew my fear of Richard, and he didn't mind keeping our connection a secret. When prom came around, Alex and I agreed that we would go to the dance with our friends to prevent any suspicions. However, when Richard learned that I intended to attend prom, he refused to allow me go. He told me it was a waste of time and declined to get me a dress. To be honest, I didn't care about getting a new outfit because all I wanted to do was have fun with my friends. I begged him to let me go because I had always gotten good marks, just as he wanted, but he scolded me, saying these friendships were meaningless and that going to the prom was no big deal. He and Janet argued about it since she didn't see why I should stay at home when all my classmates were out. This is when I recall Richard saying that teenagers had no sense of right and wrong and that he was not going to let me leave just so I could mess around when I could stay at home and be safe. I argued with Richard, attempting to reason with him and explain how important this event was to me as a teenager, but he remained obstinate, dismissing my demands as frivolous and trivial. He said that if I went out to prom, he would lock me out. I was the only one who didn't go to prom, so I spent the entire night crying alone in my room. I was getting sick and weary of living with Richard. After high school, it was difficult for me to meet Alex because I was not allowed to go out and did not have a phone. I asked Richard if I could have a phone, and he told me that at my age, I didn't need one. I attempted to explain to him that I was going away to college and that everyone had a phone, but Dad said that if I needed a phone, I would have to pay for it myself. This is when I decided to find a part-time job so I could work until I needed to leave for college. The compensation was low, but it gave me the opportunity to earn some money and become more independent. I could also spend out with my lover, Alex, without Richard finding out, since I would make up excuses about being at work while meeting him. Eventually, I learned that I had been accepted to a prominent university on a full-ride scholarship. This was a major deal because no one from my town had gotten in, so Richard took it upon himself to tell everyone how proud he was of me, bragging about my accomplishment to anyone who would listen. He never truly complimented me, but he did brag about it in front of others, as if it were his own triumph. Following my college acceptance, I probably let out the largest sigh of relief in my life. Richard ultimately had nothing to complain about because I had accomplished his biggest desire of attending a good institution on a scholarship. I was also working, so he could no longer label me lazy. Also, Dad was so pleased that he agreed to purchase me a phone and requested me to save the money I had been earning from my job to cover potential college bills. He also let me hang out with my pals after work. For the first time, I was permitted to enjoy fun just like everyone else. Alex and I knew we'd be apart once we started college, but we made a vow to meet whenever possible. We were intimate with each other once or twice, and each time we were very careful. About a month later, I began to have unusual sensations similar to my menstruation, but without actually having it. Now, as a smart kid, I understood something was wrong with my body. I was also seeking food at odd hours. I panicked and told Alex I needed to take some pregnancy tests, and he agreed. I performed 4 tests, and all of them returned positive results. I was so astonished that I slumped on the floor and cried. It felt like I was experiencing one of the worst nightmares of my life. Alex attempted to calm me, but I was shivering uncontrollably. I knew Richard would kill me if he found out I was pregnant, especially since it was right before I was supposed to start college. Alex informed me that this was all my decision, and he would support me no matter what. He said he'd talk to his parents, and then we'd talk to Richard so he wouldn't get violent with me. He knew about my home life and was concerned for me. Alex's parents were quite kind, and his mother hugged me and reminded me that it happens to everyone, so I shouldn't be so concerned. They agreed to come over to my house so that we could all break the news to Richard. Janet and Richard were startled to learn that I was pregnant. Janet questioned me again whether I was sure, and I nodded because I had taken several tests. Richard, on the other hand, erupted in rage, shrieking at me that this was why he never wanted to adopt children from strangers, since there was no assurance of their character. He called me a number of derogatory terms that I will not mention here, and he informed me that I had essentially ruined my life. Alex's parents attempted to calm him down, but Richard went off on them about how everything was their son's fault, and he appeared to be about to physically hit Alex, who sat calmly in the corner. This is when I began to cry, and informed Richard that I had no intention of continuing the pregnancy, so he didn't need to be concerned. I promised him that things would return to normal, and that I would attend college as planned. This is when Janet joined us and stated that she needed to speak with Richard discreetly. They excused themselves as I sat sobbing and twitching nervously. Alex's parents regarded me sympathetically. When Janet and Richard returned, Janet began speaking, and her words hit me like a tidal wave. She voiced her idea that we did not have to give up the child, implying that I could take the pregnancy to term and subsequently renounce parental rights to them. I sat astonished in silence as she emphasized that this child was a gift from God and advised us not to consider any other possibilities. Richard chimed in, echoing Janet's feelings and saying that this arrangement would be ideal, especially since Janet was already pregnant. His statements really perplexed me, and I couldn't understand what he was implying. Richard stated that they only found out Janet was expecting a week ago, but they kept the news to themselves since they were still processing it. And now that I was also pregnant, they thought that they could raise both children as siblings. The shock of the discovery had me speechless as I grappled with the gravity of their request and the unexpected turn of events. Alex's parents were similarly taken aback by the proposal and quickly expressed their displeasure, but Richard interjected, stating that it was not their decision to make in the first place, and looked at me eagerly, waiting for a response. I was seized with nerves, but I knew deep down that I couldn't accept Janet and Richard's proposal. I couldn't handle the notion of handing up my child to be raised in an atmosphere similar to the one I had grown up in with them. While Janet had proven to be a caring mother in many ways, I couldn't overlook the fact that she couldn't protect herself from Richard's behaviour, let alone ensure my child's safety. The prospect of exposing my unborn kid to the same uncertainty and potential harm seemed unacceptable. As much as I desired to become a mother one day, I knew the timing and circumstances were not perfect for me. I couldn't have a child under these circumstances, since I knew I couldn't secure their safety and well-being. I firmly told Richard that while I was overjoyed that I would be getting a sibling soon, I could not continue with my pregnancy because I was not mentally or physically strong enough to go through it. Also, I couldn't comprehend watching my child grow up with Janet and Richard while pretending they were just siblings. I couldn't take the thought of lying to my own child and denying them the truth about their parentage. Janet began to cry as she heard my decision, telling me how upset she was that I couldn't do this for her after she had given so much for me. Richard was enraged and stood up from his seat to walk around the room. I attempted to explain, but they refused to understand. Alex's mother stepped in, saying she agreed with my decision and could schedule an appointment for me with the gynecologist so we could move forward with the following steps. This only made Janet scream harder, and Richard began to rage, asking if I was delighted that I was hurting her so much. He then told me I needed to gather my belongings and leave the residence. My eyes widened in surprise as Richard stated that he was sick and tired of having me around the house, since I was nothing but ungrateful and selfish for not giving them my child. Alex's parents gently advised me to pack my belongings as soon as possible because they could see how violent Richard had become. I dashed upstairs to rapidly pack up all of my critical paperwork and albums, as well as whatever clothes I could find. When I arrived downstairs, Richard warned me to take anything I could, since he was going to throw everything away and burn it the next day. I tried to speak with Janet, but she refused to even look at me. As I walked out, Richard told me that I should never return. I just didn't understand what I'd done wrong for them to dismiss me so harshly, as if I meant nothing. I returned home with Alex and his parents, who kindly offered me a place to stay. The next several days were a blur as Alex's parents took me to the gynecologist, where we scheduled the much-needed procedure. It was a difficult decision for both me and Alex, but in the end we knew it was the best option for our futures. After the procedure, I spent the next 3 days resting with Alex by my side. He and his folks were really nice and took the best care of me they could. Throughout everything, Richard and Janet never contacted. When the time came for me to go into college, I texted Richard, hoping he'd forgiven me by. However, he responded by declaring how much of a failure and disappointment I was, and how I had turned into a prostitute. Thus, he didn't want anything to do with me. He stated that he did not want his biological daughter to turn out like me. His remarks wounded me so much that I cried for hours. They were the only parents I knew, and now they'd neatly cut me off as they were preparing to have their own child. My college years were challenging yet fulfilling. I had to work part-time to cover my costs, while also studying hard to preserve my grades. It was difficult, but I was determined to succeed. Thankfully, Alex stayed by my side through it all, exactly as he promised. He would come to see me at college whenever he could. Honestly, his unwavering encouragement kept me going even when things became rough. During the holidays, his parents would frequently invite me down to spend time with them. They began to feel like my family. I graduated from college with honours, obtaining the title summa cum laude. Alex and his parents were there to support me during my graduation ceremony. I got a wonderful, comfortable job in my field. It was a proud moment for me, knowing how hard I had worked to get there. Alex and I eventually moved in together, and our friendship strengthened over time. We helped each other through the ups and downs of life. After several years together, we decided to take the next step and be married. Our wedding day was a magnificent celebration of our love and dedication to one another, attended by our closest friends and family. The idea of inviting Richard and Janet to my wedding did not even cross my head. Alex and I have been married for years and have spent our time together building our lives. We recently made the major decision to buy a new home for ourselves while renting out our former. We've transformed this new space into a cozy refuge where we can make new memories and plan for the future. We bought our second home to be closer to Alex's parents, who are becoming older. They've become like parents to me, and I want to help them in any way I can. It's been nearly 25 years since Richard and Janet kicked me out, and I barely remember them. I haven't given them much thought over the years, but I do recall crying and missing them a lot during my first year of college. But by the second year, I realized that this was my chance to start a new life for myself, free of their rejection, so I forced myself to stop thinking about them. It hurt a lot, and it required a lot of strength for me to create this life on my own. They've never called me in all these years, and I've never bothered to check in with them either. Throughout this time, Alex has been my rock, my companion in every way. We never had children, but we do have 2 cats that we adore. Every other weekend, we visit Alex's parents. We go on travels frequently and enjoy trying new eateries together. Overall, I can say that my life has gone well, and I wish I could embrace my 16-year-old self now for being so concerned about her future. I just received a follow request on Instagram from an unknown girl named Emily, who had a very similar last name. When I viewed her profile, I was surprised to see how much she resembled Richard. I accepted her request, and she wrote me a message saying hello, to which I replied. She then told me that this might be an odd question, but she wanted to know if I knew anyone named Richard or Janet. I almost caught my breath since I was now certain that it was her. She was their daughter. I was nervous to respond, but I also wanted to be honest, so I told her that I had known them since I was 6 years old, when they adopted me. Emily immediately eagerly replied that she wanted to chat to me if I was comfortable, to which I agreed. I gave her my number, and she called me. It was awkward at first because I didn't know what to say, but Emily began enthusiastically about how she had always known that her parents had a child before her because she had seen my pictures in the family photo album, but whenever she asked them about it, they refused to explain. She told me that she had been looking for me for a long time, having learned my name from individuals in our area, and that, by chance, she had lately came onto my profile. She stated that she had no reason to contact me other than to know the truth. Emily's sincere yearning for the truth made me feel conflicted, but I realized I had to be honest with her. With a heavy heart, I began to tell unpleasant memories from my past, such as how her parents had urged me to give up my child for them, and then kicked me out when I refused. I didn't hold back as I explained how they had been away from my life for years, and how the only reason I had survived was due to the love and support of my husband's parents. It was a challenging conversation, full of raw emotion and terrible memories that I had long kept locked inside me. Emily's voice was filled with astonishment and amazement as I spoke, but she listened intently, taking in all I said. When I finished, there was a heavy stillness on her end. After taking a time to process what I had just said, Emily told me that she had no idea her parents had treated me so viciously, and that she had always assumed that I had fled on my own volition, as that was what they had allegedly told everyone back in our community. She told me she never dreamed her parents would do such a thing, and thanked me for being honest. She apologized to me on behalf of her parents, expressing genuine concern for the suffering they had caused me. After our talk, I've been grateful that Emily made the effort to contact me over the years. Her understanding and support have given me peace and validation. However, I can't stop worrying about how Richard and Janet will react when they find out I told Emily the truth. Did I make a mistake by telling them the truth, or should I have remained silent? Update 1. I just wanted to let you know that I was correct in my concerns, as I have received many calls and texts from Janet and Richard in the last 48 hours. I have never changed my phone number in all these years, so I suppose it was easy for them to find me. They've sent me several messages, calling me various names, but their main point of contention is that I revealed our family secrets with Emily, accusing me of breaching their trust. Richard wrote in a mail that I should have just kept my mouth shut, like I did for all these years, and not tried to get between him and his daughter. I've been avoiding their calls and messages, feeling overwhelmed and unsure how to handle this sudden confrontation. Update 2, I told my spouse about everything. He had no idea Emily was reaching out to me. However, when he discovered that I had spilt the beans, he felt that I should not have done so. He stressed that it was not because sharing the truth was wrong, but because he believed Richard was plainly insane, and this would only add extra drama to our lives. I did talk with Emily about everything. She told me that following our talk, she approached Richard and Janet, who attempted to deny everything. They told her I was a liar and a greedy person who took advantage of them until I could leave for college. Emily, on the other hand, refused to trust them and urged them to leave her children alone. She also informed them that she would be cutting them off and no longer assisting them financially. Emily went on to tell me how she and her husband had recently adopted triplets, but Richard and Janet were not happy about it and refused to even come see her children. It had made her question their actions, but they had dismissed her concerns. However, after contacting me and learning the truth about my past, she understood why they were unhappy with her adopting her children. She told me she had no idea Richard and Janet would lash out at me, and she promised to ask them to stop. She even invited me to visit her triplets whenever I had time, saying that no matter how her parents treated me, she would always want to get to know me better because I was her sibling. I feel a lot better after my talk with Emily. I'm genuinely astonished by how kind she is and how different she is from Richard and Janet. I might accept her invitation and go visit her children with my spouse one of these days. Update 3. It's been 9 months since my last update, and some of you have asked for one. So here it is. I blocked Richard and Janet from all communication channels. Therefore, I have not received any threatening texts from them. Additionally, Emily intervened and spoke with them, so I'm sure they had no choice but to back off. Alex and I have visited Emily and her husband at least 6 times in the last few months, and they have always been kind and friendly. We spent hours catching up, telling stories, and bonding over our childhood memories. During these travels, I've also had the opportunity to spend time with Emily's triplets, who are utter joy. I'm sincerely grateful Emily reached out to me, and I'm glad for the newfound relationship with her and her family, which has helped me recover from past traumas.